Cheers. Let's celebrate craft brewing on our next hunting trip. I'm Scott Linden here with a special bonus holiday edition of the Upland Nation podcast. Yeah, we'll celebrate right here, right now, so you can celebrate maybe in some new and fun and different ways throughout the holiday season and, of course, deep into next bird season, and that's the whole point. You know, we're celebrating right now Christmas, New Year's, Hanukkah, and then reliving all those great days in the field. Maybe you're still hunting. I am. With our dogs and friends. Why not expand our beer universe, going beyond the corporate stuff and enriching our experience in some of the cool places we hunt with beer that really has a terroir, as they say in wine. I'm going to help you through the maze of craft brewing with a quick primer on the types of beer, how to drink it, how to store it, and if we have time, even some great craft breweries in bird hunting hotspots. So if you love beer, you're in the right place for this special, very special edition of the Upland Nation podcast, made possible by Sage and Breaker Gun Care Products, Purina Pro Plan Sport Dog Food, MidValleyClays.com, TrueLock Chokes, MidwayUSA.com, Pointer Shotguns, and High Viz Shooting Systems. Well, there's never been a better time to be drinking craft beer since it was made legal, in effect, back in the early to mid-'80s. Yeah, can you believe it? That's not so long ago, but that's when craft brewing, small brewers, were actually made legal. 9,000 of them now populate this wonderful country of ours, many of those places in small towns where we either headquarter or pass through on our way to incredible bird hunting. It becomes more incredible when we stop and pick up a growler or a six-pack of local beer, because how better to appreciate the area we're at than to drink something made with loving care by local brewers. I know there's a lot of misconceptions, and I'm going to deal with some of those about what beer is. I'll never forget, first off, stopping in Wyoming many, many years ago. I had one night, overnight somewhere, and the manager of the hotel had a special manager's happy hour. I went in, and this was, in fact, it was not even a town. It was just along the road somewhere. So I walk into the manager's happy hour, and I ask for a craft beer. And the bartender looks at me and says, "What craft beer? What do you mean by that? What a Pilsner or a porter or anything like that?" And he says, "Oh, you mean a dark beer?" And I said, "Well, yeah, it could be, but it doesn't have to be." And then he finally confessed that he had one, and it was, amazingly enough, it was made in my hometown of Bend, Oregon, by Deschutes Brewery. And in fact, Deschutes Brewery, I wrote the first story when they first opened in '88. It was right on the heels of that the federal law changes that allowed a commercial craft beer brewing industry. And speaking of dark beer, one of the major misconceptions is that it tastes funny. It certainly tastes different. Many of them do, although I'm thinking of one at Van Henyen that I love so much. It's a black lager. The color is different. It might be a little bit more malty, but it doesn't taste that much different than a regular lager. Anyway, at Deschutes Brewery's opening night, I watched a whole bunch of folks who were clearly new to the world of craft beer come up and order what ended up being for many decades what I'll call the strongest, least familiar style for Americans. That was a porter. And they have a good one. It's won many awards, Deschutes Breweries, porter. They drink a half of that glass and slide it up and then order the lightest light beer they could find. And since then, of course, we've all become a little bit more accustomed to beer and beer styles. And right now, don't ask me why, but IPAs are the big thing. And it's not even just plain old IPAs anymore. It's double IPAs and juicy IPAs and hazy IPAs. Hey, whatever floats your boat. But for those of you who are drinking corporate beer all the time because it's handy, well, anymore these days, it doesn't need to be that way. Why not taste the place? Man, I had to write that down. That's a great bumper sticker. With a craft beer that's brewed near where you're hunting. All right, so that's the point. But there is one more important point to make, and it's alleged that Benjamin Franklin said it first. I'll take it that way. He said God made beer because he loves us and wants us to be happy. Well, he was absolutely right, especially on a bird hunt, and especially with craft beer. It is kind of a passport to more fun. You end the day, the dog's watered and fed, he's up in his nice, dry, warm bed. Now it's time to crack one and enjoy the fellowship. Why not also enjoy local ingredients, the unique culture that went into that beer? And quite often, if you're visiting a brewery, most of them have a tap room, a tasting room, whatever you want to call it, a pub, brew pub. Lots of fascinating down-home hospitality. Sure, you can buy it at a store, and as a last resort, go ahead. It's still local beer. But why not toast your hunt with something that came from the same ground that the pheasants or the quail or the sharptails came from that you chased that day? Can you think of anything cooler than to taste the hunt in a frosty mug of malty goodness? Do I sound like a commercial? Well, I'm a believer. I think the brewing culture is worth a little bit more attention in a lot of ways. And I've written about that a few times for travel magazines and things like that. Even wrote a piece for a couple fly fishing and a couple bird hunting magazines on beer. So I pulled all that together, and I'm just going to kind of give you the primer, if you want to call it that, on craft beer. The joy of craft brewing to a great degree is the atmosphere in the brew pub. I'm drinking coffee right now, which is one of the many ingredients people put in beer these days. Don't get me started on that. There really is kind of that Cheers vibe where everybody knows your name. And even if you're brand new, if you're walking into a craft brew pub, there's a good chance most of the people there are going to be friendly, open. Hey, you might even get a hunting tip or two. But they will be certainly more welcoming than they would be in many other places. Quite often, the proprietor is behind the bar. The ones who brew the beer are pouring the beer. It's relaxed and informal, and the conviviality is thick as a locally brewed stout. And you know the other thing, and you know why we go for, you know, the unique attributes of the place. Whether it's the vast plains of Montana for sharptails or the incredibly thick, beautiful golden, well, hopefully by then the leaves are off the tree, but you know what I mean, in the grouse woods. It's something special. And you can get that specialness after dark at one of the local craft breweries. Sights and sounds, the smells, whether it's brewing beer or the kitchen. You know, a lot of these places have a great kitchen. They kind of pride themselves on their pub food, kind of a different twist on a pizza or a burger or something even more unique, especially in the Midwest, for example, where some of those things you'll never find on a menu anywhere else. So you're getting the local color, maybe even a little bit of live music. And here's some good news. Most pubs will welcome your bird dog. All right, have I made the case? Let me continue. I know it sounds highfalutin, but beer does broaden your perspective as well as your waistline. But, you need the calories. That's how I rationalize it. You need the calories after a long day in the field. You gotta put back the potassium, the other electrolytes that beer will give to you. Beer is simply liquid bread. Okay, it's fermented. There's an alcohol content, and we'll get into that a little bit as well. But there's so much going for beer beyond quenching your thirst. Unless your thirst is for culture, friendship, conviviality, local knowledge, it happens. But we're here for the beer. Happy New Year. These days, brewers are stirring up all sorts of recipes, from those resembling your store-bought favorites to any number of drafts infused with everything from chocolate to bourbon. I mentioned coffee. Fruits of all types, they've got it. In fact, the joy of most craft brewers is they rotate. Well, they'll make a few old standards that everybody loves, but they'll also rotate something else in every once in a while. Check the chalkboard every time you go in. It'll be different. And by the way, they're pretty good with digital communications as well, so you can probably find lots of current information on their website or their Instagram page, most likely, maybe even Facebook. You'll find all sorts of things, bright and bubbly, lagers and pilsners, or the bready stuff that offers a little bit more heft for your palate. Beer is pretty simple in its basic components. And in fact, in Bavaria, I joke about it with everybody I visit with at a pub. In Bavaria, the Reinheitsgebot is the German, what they call the German purity law. There are only 4 things allowed in beer over there. And I'm a believer. Water, hops, barley malt, and yeast. Okay. That's the starting point. That makes beer. Now, what else do you want to put in it to make your customers happy? Well, if you're a brewer, the sky's the limit. Different types of yeast, different types of barley, different types of hops, of course. Even the water, which is where a lot of the terroir comes from, if you want to be highfalutin. All of those things are changeable. Then you can add other grains. A lot of Mexican lagers will add corn. Some lagers in Bohemia or Central Europe will add rice. On the corporate side, that's one of the things that makes Budweiser unique. There's rice in that grain bill, they call it. Of course, Budweiser also they call it beechwood aging. They dump a bunch of beechwood chips into the vat. That's their beechwood aging. Fruits of all sorts, usually starting as a puree. They'll mix that in towards the end of a brewing process. Spices. They'll store beers in wooden barrels that have also held whiskeys or wines or port wines or all sorts of other interesting alcoholic drinks. And then some of these guys who are doing what are called farmhouse recipes will literally leave the brew kettle open to the local environment. The lid is off, so to speak, and they're letting local wild yeasts into their beer brewing process. Those are the things, many of the things, that add the unique and intriguing flavors to beer, just like they do with wine. The difference being there's a lot less attitude in a brew pub than there is in a wine tasting facility. I'm Scott Linden. You're listening to a bonus edition of the Upland Nation podcast. We're celebrating the end of the year, the beginning of a new year, by becoming a little bit more fluent in the language of beer. Speaking of which, B-E-E-R is really just a catch-all word. It used to describe all sorts of things that were fermented accidentally or on purpose with some sort of grain. In the last several hundred years, it's basically come to define sprouted barley. They call it malt. That's barley that's been dampened and starts to germinate and then is dried out. Water, yeast, and hops, like I've described. Two predominant styles that we see most of the time in most, quote, corporate American beers are either an ale or a lager. And there are many names for all of them, and many of the subcategories fall under one or the other. Ales have one type of yeast that creates the fermentation. Those ferment at a slightly warmer temperature than lager-style beers. The ales have what they call top fermenting yeasts, and lagers have what they call bottom fermenting yeast. And if you made your own or you've been to a brewery where they can show you this, literally, if you look at what happens at some point, there's a sediment in the bottom, and the yeast in a bottom fermenting yeast, the yeast go down to the bottom in a lager. All right. At some point in the 1500s, when the Germans started exporting beer by slow boat, they figured out that hops could preserve those beers so that they were still tasty and drinkable when they arrived at some of their distant customers across the Baltic Sea, for example. Of course, the English fine-tuned that process when they had a serious presence in India. See where I'm going there? India, serious presence, English beer. They created the first IPA, India Pale Ale, so that when that great Newcastle Nut Brown was shipped on a slow boat from London or Newcastle, by the time it got to Mumbai, it was still drinkable by the soldiers, the diplomats, the commercial interests, the English expats who were over there in India. Okay, you know some of the others. Wheat is now substituted for malted barley. Corn is often added. I mentioned that. Rice, you name it. The sky's the limit now, and if you go to a great brewery, you'll see a little bit of everything. But that is the joy of a craft beer. Load your fridge with a hazy IPA or a whiskey barrel-aged stout or a chocolate porter. You're on an adventure, and it's local beer right there where you shot those Bob Whites earlier that day. Now, the joy of craft beer, as opposed to corporate beer, is often that they're fresher. Most brewers pride themselves on fresh beer. And I mean, you're drinking it within days to weeks of its brewing. That's why they rotate so many offerings. That's why quite often brew pubs will have chalkboards instead of printed menus, so they can scratch one, erase one and put another one up. Anyway, whatever your preference is, there's probably something out there for you, and it's a thirst-quenching, unique taste of both the brewer's art and your hunting destination. Some of these places are pretty cool. One of my favorites is a lot like what I think an English pub would be like. Many of them have taxidermy and an outdoor theme, or a sports theme, or a local theme, whatever that means. All right, so here we are. We've got our basic knowledge of brewing and beer styles. You love the outdoors, or you wouldn't be a bird hunter. I'm a beer hunter too, I admit it. So now you got to find these places. Well, these days that's easy. You know, there are any number of places you can go online and just choose brew pub in whatever town you're in. Easy enough to do. You might look at the ratings on a site like Yelp, but not just for the number of stars, because that's kind of subjective. You know, somebody orders an IPA and they really wanted a very light and crispy beer. They're not going to give them 5 stars. Anyway, look at the reviews. Look at the menu. See if they got something you might like. And sometimes they'll have a lot of beers that you wouldn't touch. But sometimes they'll have one that's worth a sip. And let's talk about that for a minute, because unlike a lot of places, you go to a great wine bar, they'll give you a taste. The problem is they'll probably charge you for the taste. At most brew pubs, they'll just pour a little, let you give it a try. I still have half a taste of IPA and salute my good friend Sergeant Ben Warner every time I walk into a brew pub. Go Airborne. Anyway, it's a welcoming environment. Taste the brews you like, reject the ones you don't like. That's the joy of beer tasting. Find one that you enjoy and order a pint. In most of the U.S. brew pubs, a pint is not really a pint. You know, in England or, well, anywhere, if you remember your weights and measures, a pint is supposed to be 16 ounces. Well, seldom. It's probably 12. It might be 14. But we still call it that. So head into town after your bird hunt. Have 1 or 2. Or if you have a designated driver, have 3. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, too. And taste your hunting trip. Maybe there will be a fire pit, game of horseshoes out there. There's lots of craft breweries with cornhole, darts, of course. It's kind of a fun way to get to know the community where you're visiting, where you're spending some money, where you're absorbing the culture. All right, let's talk about that. Practical stuff. You want to store your beer in the warmest part of the refrigerator. Cellar temperature is not only good for most red wines, it's good for beer. 50, 55 degrees, depending on the style. The darker the beer, most brewers would suggest it's slightly warmer, towards the 55-degree temperature. The more clear the beer, the cooler end, 50 degrees. If you keep it too cold, except if you're mowing the lawn that day, you'll dampen some of the more subtle flavors in your beer. If you keep it too warm, well, what's the point? Hey, even the English are now quaffing cool beer. Now, if you're like me, you carry a growler around in your truck all the time, just in case I find a beer I really like and I won't be there again. Well, sure, go ahead. Have them fill a growler and take it home or take it back to bird camp. Store it upright, because your growler cap is probably not completely beer tight, and drink it within a few days. Remember, they've poured it. There is carbonation, but because your lid is not beer tight, it's going to start going flat fairly quickly. That's a good excuse to invite the guys from the next camp over to share their growler with you. By the way, a growler, I'm sorry. Growler is one of those big jugs. They're usually, 64 ounces. But you can get smaller ones. You can probably get bigger ones, although I don't know how you carry them out. But anyway, growlers are a great way to buy beer because you're reusing them. And you can get fancy ones, or you can just buy a big jug from the brewer, and he'll fill it up for you. He or she will fill it up for you. Okay, just like the temperature of your beer, the temperature of glass that you drink it in is pretty important. Now, if you go to a good brew pub, they'll have a little gizmo on the back bar. They'll turn the glass over, whatever shape of glass, style of glass it is, depending on the beer. They'll turn it over, press it onto this little gizmo that sprays a little cool water into the interior. That's as cool as you want your glass. If your glass comes out of the freezer, it will, number one, dampen the flavors, just like if the beer is too cool. And they also, all that condensed air, which is now ice on the interior of your glass, will dilute that precious malty nectar inside. Okay. So now you know how to drink it and even store it to a degree. What about what tastes like what? Well, first off, not all craft beers are bitter. Yeah, right now it's very fashionable to drink some of the more bitter brews like, well, an IPA or worse, a double IPA. Lots of hops to them, and hops are what makes a beer bitter. They'll also add some floral notes. But remember now, a lot of brewers are cooking up recipes with stronger malt tones or subtle hop character, and that's the art in brewing. It's also the point of those free tastes. Find one you like, from wine-like to spice cake, grassy, berry. It's really just chemistry in a glass, but that's the cool thing because everybody gets to taste the experiment. So you have a long day in the field and it's a warm day, try a juicy pale ale. If it's a cold winter night, maybe a toasty, more oatmeal flavored porter is what you have in mind. You almost have to eat it with a fork. It's an adventure in a mug, and that's the joy of it. Now, I mentioned alcohol by volume, which is one of the more important things about craft beers. Most corporate beers in the United States have about 3 to 5, sometimes 6% alcohol by volume, ABV. You'll see that term on the chalkboards in most of the brew pubs too. They'll have a little bit more alcohol by volume, 5-6% for some of the ales, pale ales in particular, lagers, up to 12% for some of the imperial ales, which are probably legally closer to what used to be called barley wine. And thank you again, those of you out there who are brewing some sort of a session beer, mainly ales, with 3.5 or 4% ABV. So if you're looking, the chalkboard also ought to tell you how many international bitterness units are in a particular beer, IBU. So you see the ABV number, and then you'll see the IBU number. You want a lighter, drinkable, what they call session ale, go for 10 to 40 IBUs. They'll have more of a grain flavor as you add hop content. And it's not more hops. Sometimes it's just how long they are boiling along with the other ingredients. Hop flavors will increase the IBU. Some will be over 80. Of course, the more hops, the more what they call floral and citrus notes as well. So whatever it is, from bright and fizzy to subtle and mellow, there's something out there for everybody when it comes to traveling hunters who want to literally absorb more of the culture of where they are. Taste the terroir of your hunting spot with a craft beer. Oh, wow. I'm going to talk about birdie beer towns, and each of those towns are places I've visited, and I will also offer a hunting hint for each of them in the second half of this bonus edition, holiday version of the Upland Nation podcast, made possible by Sage and Breaker Gun Care Products, Purina Pro Plan Sport Dog Food, Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School, Trulock Chokes, MidwayUSA.com, Pointer Shotguns, and High Viz Shooting Systems. Welcome back to the Upland Nation podcast, holiday celebration bonus edition. Everything you ever wanted to know about craft beer, which I think is the perfect accompaniment to an incredible, well, they're all incredible, to a bird hunting excursion. Yeah, it's not like I'm going to tell you where to hunt or how to shoot better or train your dog. There are a lot of folks who can do that better, but when we come to beer, I've drank a few and I've learned a lot. I've brewed a few hundred gallons, and I've toured a lot of breweries and helped make beer on a commercial basis. What I've learned from all of that is that this manipulation, this artful crafting of water, barley, yeast, and hops really does give you a taste of your hunting environment. They're community in a glass, so pull up your bar stool, loosen your boot laces. Let's go through some of my favorite birdie beer towns. South Dakota is full of them. You know, most decent-sized towns will have an entrepreneur who's decided that town needs a local beer. And if you're up in the northeast corner of the state, number one, the hunting in Watertown, South Dakota, is pretty darn good. Watertown Brewing is where I would go for one of their Coddington cream ales. A cream ale isn't what you think it is. It's an English style that is crisp and clean, and if I were to draw a corporate beer analogy, it'd probably be a cross between a Coors and a Budweiser. If you're ready to experiment a little, try their Downtown Brown. It's not near as heavy as many brown beers. Yeah, that's another color. There's all the goldens and the yellows. Then there's the dark ones that are almost black. And then there's a lot in between, which are lumped into the category of brown ales mostly. Now, near Watertown, there's a lot of waterfowl production areas and related kind of public ground. And I've always had good success hunting the small bodies of water with cattails surrounding them for undisturbed ringnecks. Most people won't bother chasing birds in those small areas. The first hunt I did out there was fascinating. I'd just gotten a new GPS collar, was still learning my way around it, and let's see, that would have been Manny, I think. He was on point somewhere in there, and you've lost your dog in thick cover of one sort or another. So the collars tell me, oh, he's right there. So I walk over there and I'm looking, and I don't see, you can't see, your hand in front of your face in those cattails. But I finally get to the point where his mark, his dot, and my dot are all in the same spot. And I'm looking and I'm looking. I finally part the cattails right in front of me, and there he is on point. I look at his nose, and then I look at where it's pointing, and within one dog length of his nose is another nose, a raccoon. And he's on point too, for all intents and purposes. He is standing there frozen, not knowing what to do next, because here's this big dog looking at him. You know, I've read enough about. I've never had to put up with a raccoon fight. Knock wood. But if I did, I knew this was going to be the time. No, didn't happen. I walked, maybe not the smartest thing to do, but I walked right in between them and shoot off the raccoon, and grabbed Manny by the collar and walked him the other way. Well, the good news is a half hour later, he does the same thing. This time, a ringneck gets up, falls in the pond. I get a great water retrieve. End of the day, yeah, we celebrated at Watertown Brewing. Celebrated the shot, the dog work, and the safe exit of a raccoon. Now, Nevada, Chucker Country. Yeah, I know a little bit about that place, and I love it. There aren't near as many brewers in Chucker Country as there are down towards Las Vegas, but there are at least a couple. The one I love the most is in Reno. And you know, you can hunt chuckers within 20 minutes of Reno if you really know what you're doing. Great Basin Brewing Company, they're selling their beer all over the state. Well, all over the Great Basin now that I think about it. I picked some up in an Oregon town not too long ago. Great Basin Brewing, based in Reno. You can find it in Winnemucca and Elko and all those other places. They've got a little bit of everything, and they can a lot of it. So watch for their Ichthyosaur IPA or their Bristlecone Doppelbock. Doppel, of course, double. Doppelbock, that's a brown beer. There's a lot of history there. Someday I'll help you with that if you like. And then they got an Alpine Lager that's to die for. You know, after a warm day early in the season, that's better than any lawn mowing beer you've ever had. If you're a hophead, they got a lot of double IPAs. So head for Great Basin Brewing Company, Reno, or your chosen community's beer aisle at the grocery or the convenience store. Now, chucker hunting tip. I don't talk about the flat ground much when I'm talking about chucker hunting, but here's the deal. A lot of chucker slopes, you'll go up, and there's the top, of course. It's a ridge line or a mountain or whatever. There's something flat at the top. But also look to the flat spots between the top and the bottom. There's, a saddle or a little bowl or something like that caused by erosion or volcanic activity. Those flat spots, even a little terrace, and doesn't need to be very big. Chuckers will often hang in those. I don't think they like walking up and downhill any more than you and me. So they'll hang there, especially because often that's where the vegetation is a little thicker. So that you got basically a sagebrush forest on those flats. Well, enjoy your visit to Nevada Chucker Country and the local beers that are brewed right there up the road from you. In the upper Midwest, you grouse hunters near Park Falls, the ruffed grouse capital of the world, might want to visit Woodruff, Wisconsin. Rocky Reef Brewing is the name of the company. They've got at least a half dozen fresh taps. They're usually serving up a Saison, which is a Belgian-style beer, and a Winding Trail American Porter. Both good. I'm not big on the Belgian style, but many people are. It's got a little bit too fruity, floral note for me. But they can make up for that with their Winding Trail American Porter, that's for sure. If you're hunting that country, open your chokes and watch out for ticks. It's the only place I've ever been lectured to by two separate veterinarians about the tick danger. Yeah, take care of your dog there as well. If you're in western Kansas, one of my favorite places, whether you're chasing bobwhites and ringnecks, head for the real Wild West at Dodge City Brewing. Yeah, Dodge City is a fantastic place to go anyway. It's a great place to headquarter for all your hunting in that area. There are lots of other great towns out there from Goodland on down. But Dodge City Brewing is pretty cool. The building is really neat. They make a great Mexican lager called Louis Cerveza Lager. Yeah, there'll be corn in that one. And then 1872 lager is their most popular brew, and I understand why. It's brewed in the pre-Prohibition style. Back before Prohibition, there were hundreds and hundreds of local breweries. All but about a dozen out of business at Prohibition, and most never came back. If you're there around dinner time, get one of those brick oven pizzas. And then if you're hunting there, Jetmore and Osborne are small towns, kind of north, and I think kind of north and a little west of there. Lots of walk-in country. And if you're walking in, never pass a plum thicket without putting a dog through it. Even the ones close to the road. We were gearing up for a TV show. Just parked alongside the road there, put on gear. Couldn't find my dog. Turned around, right up the hill, not 20 feet off the road. There he is on point. Yeah, hunt those things from one end to the other. Maybe another 20 yards beyond that, just to play it safe. Plum thickets, one of my favorite places when it comes to Kansas. In North Dakota, if you're hunting ringnecks, stop in Dickinson. I know it looks funny. It looks more like a farmer's machine shop, kind of a rural industrial vibe inside and out at Fat Fish Brewing. Fat is, if you're under 40, you spell it P-H-A-T, Fat Fish Brewing. A peanut butter stout, okay, go ahead. Their Sheepdog IPA is pretty good. They have an Oktoberfest lager. It's a little hazy, but Oktoberfest style beers are always worth a try. If you like what I'll call the Reinheitsgebot style of beer, just those 4 ingredients crafted in the right way, Oktoberfest lager. There's also a red lager many times of year. Yeah, kind of in the brown category, but a little bit less malty and a little bit more hoppy. Yeah, you'll get the idea. Here's the thing I like about North Dakota. You could be chasing pheasants all day, but if you can get into the grasslands adjacent to the cut cornfields, hey, the sharptails are right there waiting for you to pass by unnoticed. So don't neglect the edges. Well, in Montana, I love Lewistown for a bunch of reasons. Thank you, Al Gadori, for introducing me to that area, and thank you to everybody at Lewistown for being so nice over the years. I always stop. I was so excited the first time I went out there because it was under construction at the time. Big Spring Brewing. Yeah. It's 15 years old now. They've got things nailed down, but it might be the best thing to happen to Montana since block management access. They've always got an American wheat beer, if that's what you like. I love the idea of a rye-based pale ale. They've got one of those. Oh, and then everybody's got a honey beer these days, and they do too. Choke Cherry Honey Light Lager. So if you're up for something like that, they've got a few. Grapefruit? Yeah, that too. My advice about Lewistown is make sure you include those block management areas right around town. The closer the better. Most people drive past them looking for bigger ones. And then if you're there at the right time of year and maybe you can't hunt for a particular day, there is a big spring creek, and it does have trout, and it runs from way up to way down, and on the way it passes underneath town, and if you stop at the right tavern, you can sit at the right table with a glass top. You can look down at Big Spring Creek and see trout. You're listening to the Upland Nation podcast. This is our holiday bonus edition. We're celebrating all things beer. I'm Scott Linden. Thanks for listening. I hope you're learning a little bit, maybe one little thing here and there. Maybe it's the temperature you should serve beer at, for example. If you're in Nebraska, Valentine is your destination. I can almost guarantee it. Up in the Sandhills. Bolo Beer is a nice place to go. Communal tables, I love that. I'm pioneering that concept at my favorite craft brewery here in town, and it's working so far. But if you're in Valentine for the Sharptails, and who isn't, visit the beer garden at Bolo Beer. They got a wild plum gose. That's an old German recipe with, local wild plums. An aquifer ale, and a Pilsner that is made, most Pilsners aren't made with corn, but this one is, of course. It's Nebraska. Try one or more. Ask for a taster. Try 3 or 4, and then pick the one you like and have another pint or 2. And if you're going hunting near Valentine, remember this, they still allow grazing on a lot of the best sharptail ground. So take a look at the height of the grass. If it's not tall enough to bend in the wind, there probably won't be sharptails there. All right, getting closer to home, Idaho and Oregon is one of my, my local hood. And of course, I'm always looking for new beers. And if I'm near the Snake River or the Owyhee River, it's Nampa, Idaho, and Crescent Brewery. It doesn't get a lot of press. You'll have to look hard for it, but it's certainly worth a visit. Yeah, okay, I know, for some of their wacky stuff like a coconut porter or a pumpkin ale. But my first pour is always their Stutz Lager. I want to go with something I know I'll like. Wouldn't you want to start off on the right foot? Yeah. And it's another one of those pre-prohibition recipes, so it's pretty cool. If you're in Northeast Oregon, you got to stop at Baker City. Barley Browns is a legendary brewing operation. They win prizes of all sorts. In fact, the first time I was there, I was saluting my first dog to earn a prize one NAVDA score. I had one of their prize-winning beers, and everything worked out just dandy. If you're in that country and you're hunting the snake or any of those mountain ranges out in that country, the trick is to get farther from the road. Put another canyon between you and the road, because most hunters won't work that hard. Thank you, Sergeant Ben Warner, for that homespun and very useful advice. Hey, I don't care whether you buy it right there from the brewer, you take a can or a 6-pack home from the local grocery, or somebody breaks out a growler at bird camp. All of these local beers and all craft brewed beers give you a taste of the place they come from. And that is the joy of it. We're out there to enjoy the incredible habitat, our dogs working as hard as they do for us, our friends, the fellowship. It's all enriched by the beer that we enjoy at the end of the day. We're made possible by Sage and Breaker Gun Care products, Purina Pro Plan Sport Dog Food, Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School, Trulock Choke Tubes, MidwayUSA.com, Pointer Shotguns and High-Vis Shooting Systems. I'm Scott Linden. I hope your holiday season is a good one. Celebrate with friends and family. And next time you're headed out, look for my truck. I'll buy you a beer. Thanks for listening.